Well, hello, everybody. My name's Pilita Clark. I'm a business columnist and associate editor at the Financial Times, and it's very good to be here today to talk about a topic that is really at the top of everybody's minds that I'm speaking to at the moment, and that is namely, is working from home going to evolve into working from anywhere? Is this really going to be the future of post-pandemic working life for knowledge workers? And if so, what are the benefits and the pitfalls that employers and employees need to be aware of? I know a lot of people listening and watching will have their own thoughts on that, and we're very keen to hear from you and to take your questions throughout. My colleagues will be posting them through as we're speaking. But I'm extremely pleased to be joined by a panel of people who've built up a huge amount of experience in this area. We have Janeen Speer, who is the Vice President of Talent at Shopify, the Canadian e-commerce company that helps businesses build online storefront presences. And we have Nicole Sahin, who is the CEO and founder of Globalization Partners, which is a US headquartered company that helps businesses navigate the process of hiring staff abroad. Darren Murph is also with us. He's the head of remote at Gitlab, which until the pandemic was the world's largest all-remote company. Obviously, a few others joined him as time wore on last year. And finally, we have Alex Howland, who is the president and co-founder of Virbela, which is a virtual reality platform that helps people work together remotely. Welcome all. I wonder if we might just start off with a definitional question, really. I think there's a bit of confusion about what the actual difference is between working from home and working from anywhere. Nicole, when you're dealing with clients around the world, what do you tell them? What's your definition of the difference between the two?
Yeah, I mean, I think of work from anywhere as the employee has the option to literally work from anywhere. So you're saying it's up to the employee where he or she is. They might be in Argentina 1 month and Spain the next month, and you're not paying attention to where that individual is. Whereas working from home is someone having a stable home environment. You know where to run payroll. They're in that location most of their time, and a little bit more stability.
Right. Okay. Now, Janeen, does that match Shopify's definition?
Yeah, I think, for us working, we really talk about it as remote first. So digital by default is the way that we're talking about the way that we're working. So most people are working from home. Some might be working from a cottage, but generally speaking, we would want to be aware of the general region that they're in. And we do have some programs to give them a little bit more flexibility as well.
Okay. And Darren and Alex, I just want to bring you in. So Darren, is that roughly what happens at Gitlab, that if you're working from home, you're basically stuck in one spot for a while? You can't just roam around as you please?
Well, we actually realized that not everyone is amenable to working from home, or maybe they live in a home that is not amenable to remote work. And so we support third spaces. So for our team members, if they choose to work at a co-working space or a communal center, a space outside of their home, we will happily reimburse them for that. Many companies view two options, working from home or working from the office, but there are actually a lot of third spaces. And I think coming out of COVID, organizations should be mindful of creating a more inclusive opportunity for folks to work at places that suit them.
Okay. And Alex, I know your workforce has expanded hugely over the past year and a bit. Where are they all, and what's your definition of what working from anywhere really means?
Yeah, first off, maybe we'll explain a little bit about where we go to work. We go to work in one of our virtual worlds. So you might have kids, or you yourself might, enter things like Roblox or Fortnite, or some of these virtual communities that exist, often in a gaming environment. But we create these environments for work. And what that does is allows everyone to have presence together in an office and have those serendipitous conversations that you get in a physical office, but while remote. So most of the time we're interacting with each other's avatars and not looking at each other like we are here over webcam. But we have that sense of presence with our avatar. And it doesn't matter whether you're in Aruba or a coffee shop or wherever you may be, in the physical world because we're there together, present in our virtual office. So we certainly have people. We've gone from 20 folks to about 190 folks over the past 12, 13 months. And we've certainly hired from all over. We see many of our employees moving, sometimes internationally, and some people in their campers cruising the country as well.
So are you allowed to work at Virbela as yourself rather than an avatar, or do you always have to be on as an avatar?
So you have the ability to turn your camera on, like much what we're doing here. But what we find is most people choose not to. Even through the interview process, we don't force anyone to turn their camera on. And what we find is this helps reduce implicit bias in the hiring process. So many of the folks that we've hired in the past year, we never saw their face before making an offer.
Okay, that's fascinating. Yes, I'd love to have a go on that sometime. Okay, do we all think that working from anywhere, or at least working remotely, is here to stay? Or do we think that actually, as time wears on and the pandemic eases its grip on respective various countries, that it will recede and will resume some semblance of work life as it was? Janeen, I can see you nodding there. What do you think?
I think flexibility is here to stay. I think different organizations will embrace that spectrum of flexibility to a different extent. And I think that individuals will actually start to look around and say, okay, how does my life work the best? And what organization should I match myself with so that I can design my life in the best way? I think that a component of in-person connection is really important and necessary. And I would just add one thing, which is, while we've all been working remotely right now, we're working remotely during a pandemic, which is, I think, very different than the future of what working remotely can and will look like. And so I think, of course, we'll start to see, more intentional in-person, connections, and those are going to be really important. But different companies will be where it suits them along that spectrum.
Right. Because it's interesting, last week we saw Tim Cook at Apple come out and essentially say that, you could do a bit of remote working if your manager approved, but basically it has to be at least 3 days a week from, I think it was September. And he's joining a lot of other bosses who are saying the same sorts of things. So I wonder, Darren, I'm expecting you to say no, that it's kind of here to stay, but I don't know. You've become a kind of a guru for companies around the world. They're beating a path to your door because they're desperate to know how to do this properly. What do you think? Do you think it's here to stay? It's really going to stick or not?
Janeen nailed the heart of it. There's no putting the proverbial genie back in the bottle. Some organizations will realize that due to what they do, if they're in pharmaceuticals, or if they're in engineering, or if you're in automotive garage, maybe certain elements of your work can't be done remotely. But what COVID has done is greatly democratized the conversation around workplace flexibility, and it has removed a lot of barriers in geographic bias. And so one of the components coming out of this is everyone can enter a job interview now and ask a screener, what is your company's stance on workplace flexibility, and demand and expect an answer. There's no way that any organization in the world came through COVID and hasn't at least thought about that. So even for companies who are going to continue to be rigid and co-located, at least they will have to make that a formal part of their culture, and it will allow candidates to opt in or opt out based on what they best align with.
Yeah. And Nicole, I know Globalization Partners doesn't actually do the recruiting, but you help businesses who choose people, how to onboard them, essentially. So, what are you finding? Is it actually going to be a big benefit for an employer to be able to offer some measure of flexibility, whether it's working from home or working wherever they would like to at various points in the year?
Yeah, absolutely. I think so. We work with thousands of companies, and to explain what we do, basically, whenever a company wants to hire an employee in another country, we put their employee on our payroll in that country using software that kind of overlays our global legal platform. The reason it ties into this conversation is the difference between work from anywhere versus work from home is sometimes when like the employer is legally responsible for making sure that the employee is on a payroll in their home country jurisdiction, that the employer is following the laws in wherever the employee is living and working. And then the company is responsible also for paying corporate taxes in many cases based on where their employees live, or employing that person through a third party so that they're kind of eliminating some of that complexity. And basically what we've seen is companies originally started with work from anywhere because we all trust our employees, but we're seeing them kind of pull back on that a little bit to deal with some of the legal implications that I think a lot of people were surprised by. At the outset in 2020, people thought, okay, work from anywhere because, we're all just in it together to get our job done. But 2021, suddenly it's like, wow, the tax authorities are going to come after us. We have to fix this. The laws are changing very quickly. And so we're not seeing it go back into a bottle, but it's more like a little bit more refinement around policies, certainly from 2021 going forward. But also companies are so excited about the opportunity to hire the best person for the job. That's besides the better employee experience, which I agree with Darren. People aren't going to suddenly go, you can't put the genie back in the bottle. People like their freedom. But beyond that, companies are excited by the opportunity to hire salespeople all over the world instantly and overnight, and engineers anywhere they can find them, and put some cost, really great talent in lower cost locations is a great opportunity that we're seeing some businesses embrace.
Right. So, Alex, is it really a double-edged sword then for employees, do you think? Whereas on the one hand, yes, they can have a lot more flexibility and they can work wherever they feel like it. On the other hand, a job that might have been tied very much to being, in the Bay Area or a certain location suddenly isn't. And suddenly people are competing all around the world. Do you think that's correct?
I think people are maybe competing more regardless of location, and I might argue that's a good thing, right? It's helping create equality in terms of you don't just get the job because of where you're located, but you're getting the job because you have the best skill set or experience or a culture fit to get the job. So I think that's important. And what we're trying to do is put your headquarters in every market in every part of the world. So you have that experience of coming to the virtual headquarters, which gives the business, an opportunity in the sense that their headquarters is also in any market that they want to move into.
Yeah. I want to dig in a little bit deeper to the point that Nicole just made and talk about the legalities, the contractual situation for staff who are working more remotely than they're used to. And Janeen, I just wonder if you can explain to us at Shopify, you already had a bit of hybrid working and a bit of remote working, I think, before the pandemic. You've got more than 7,000 employees, I think. Not all of them in Canada, but a lot of them, obviously. How have you been navigating this question of making sure that people are employed legally wherever they are and that you're paying the correct rate of tax? And did you, in fact, go through what Nicole just described, where initially it was WFA, work from anywhere, terrific, and then had to rein in a bit, or not?
So I think even from the first update we made to our career site, we had the caveat of work from almost anywhere as we were going after new applicants. So it's something that we were pretty aware of. And, one of the things that we've done to support with this is we've created a program called Destination 90. So we do have a program in place where people can apply to be out of their region for up to 90 days to enjoy the freedom. And one of the things I'm seeing is most often these requests are coming to go be with family. So whether it's a relocation request or whether it's a Destination 90 request, it's not all people wanting to go work from the beach. So much of this, and I feel that some of this may be related to the pandemic and folks being locked down for a while. People want to go home.
Is it just to interrupt a little bit, but does everybody else find that it's really people trying to get home to see or go back to their to where they grew up and be around family as the main motivating factor, or not?
I would say
all the time, but often.
Yeah. Sorry, we're not supposed to be talking over I know it's a big no-no on Zoom calls, but No, it's just a great point, I think. Sorry, Janeen. Yeah, you were saying, that's the main reason that's happening. But then so as we're on.
Yeah, so we've mitigated some of the desire for that broader sense of adventure through Destination 90, but certainly we do have an expectation that outside of that, people are working in the correct kind of country and location, not so much house, right? So I would say that's where there's ultimately choice for people of whether it's one home or you can go if your family's in a similar region. Sure, go be there or go and do something fun, provided it's in the country and region that you're meant to be in. So I think we'll learn more about this because, again, as I mentioned before, we're still in parts of the world still in a bit more of a pandemic situation. I know other parts of the world are opening up, but I think we're going to learn more about this as we have more and more travel opening up around the world.
Right. And sorry, when did you introduce Destination 90?
That it was pretty soon after. I want to say within 3 or 4 months of us actually sending people home. So we were pretty quick in May of 2020 to send our teams home and to make that declaration that as we designed for the future, we would be remote first, and then quickly went to look and see how do we support that and facilitate some of the choices folks wanted to make.
Okay, and has there been a big take up? How many people have taken advantage of that already?
Yeah, I don't have exact numbers on me, but I would say there definitely has been interest. And like I say, it depends on where in the world you are. We've got lots more flexibility in areas like New Zealand and Australia than we do in some parts of Canada right now for travel. So it kind of depends where people are and their comfort level with traveling. But it's definitely something that we've heard has been well received.
Yeah. Excuse me. And Darren, what are the main legal and contractual or main sort of pitfalls that employers need to be aware of when they want to give maximum flexibility to employees and really let them work from anywhere?
I think the biggest pitfall is jumping headlong into this concept of let's just let everyone work from anywhere, with the focus being on physical location and then doing none of the investment on the actual workflow infrastructure. So said another way, it's not as enjoyable to go work from a beach or work near your family if working for the company is extremely difficult and there's a lot of dysfunction and chaos in the actual work process. And you'll see that most of the global narrative right now is around where people are physically located, which massively overlooks some of the underlying infrastructure of retooling workflows to be remote first. And a lot of companies just assume that people can go anywhere and we'll figure it out. And although we have done that over the past 18 months to create a long-term sustainable remote workforce, you really do need to invest in making sure that you're auditing your office first workflows and converting those as necessary to remote first workflows to set your team up for success when you are able to get the legalities ironed out.
So what does that mean? I mean, give us an example of the sort of workflow that really needs to be thought about very carefully.
Recurring meetings are a great one. So if you have wall-to-wall meetings in an office and then you just convert those to wall-to-wall meetings at home, it's arguably a worse experience. The office probably has a nicer HVAC and better coffee. The real benefits of remote work are in decoupling geography and results. And so you have to take a look at, are these meetings even necessary? Can we have a bias towards asynchronous workflows on things like FYIs and status updates? How do we actually implement new tools and then teach people how to use these new tools so that they can collaborate and brainstorm across time zones without needing to commandeer time in individual calendars? And it's things like this that you really have to ask yourself, are we still working like the office, but at home? And in any instance where that answer is yes, it's an opportunity for disruption.
Yeah, and I know Gitlab has an enormous, or it used to have an enormous work handbook that employees had to really read and understand and get to grips with this whole asynchronous working method. And actually not everybody watching will necessarily know what asynchronous means, but tell us what that means in practice.
Sure. So asynchronous is the process of moving work forward without having to commandeer someone else's time, without having to have someone else online at the exact same time. So email is a very asynchronous tool. You send an email in the morning and someone replies in the evening. La you have worked asynchronously. But yes, to your point, GitLab open sources all of how we do remote work. We have the GitLab remote playbook. It is the blueprint for how companies can transition to remote work. So a lot of people listening to this may be a bit overwhelmed with how do we make this transition. The good news is we've written it all down, everything that we've ever learned. And in fact, there are some learning certificates as well that our own employees take in onboarding that anyone in the world can take because we have open sourced it.
Okay, very interesting. Nicole, we've got some questions coming through. I want to put one to you, first of all, because it is one that I know a lot of employees are very keen to know the answer to when they, particularly if they join a new company. So what does working from anywhere mean for salaries? Generally speaking, are salaries tied to the role that you're doing or the location you're in? And therefore, will you get a lower one if you're in a relatively cheap place? What does the landscape look like out there?
I find this to be a super interesting question, and I'm excited to see the answer evolve over the next 10 years or so, because I think what we're seeing now is the democratization of opportunity. It's that truly the best person for the job, no matter where they live. But that is in direct, it's directly juxtaposed with how we have traditionally based salary, which is where people are located. So you always want the best person for the job. And salaries are always based on a basis of range, 25% to 75%. So if you're a killer company, you need the best talent, you pay in the higher end of the range. But it always is based on location. Now, companies are excited right now because they're saying, my gosh, I can hire a business development team in Colombia for a third of the cost of what I hire at the same team in the Silicon Valley. Or maybe they can hire those people in Ohio for 60% of the cost compared to the Silicon Valley. And so companies are excited. And yet for employees and for people, there's also the talent war. Everyone wants to hire everyone. It's hard to find enough talent. It's hard to find really skilled talent. And like you said, there's also this mindset of same person's doing the same job, shouldn't they make the same money? So I think we will see a leveling out with time, but I don't think it will happen overnight. Certain fields like engineering are very competitive. We're seeing a globalization of wages across the engineering sector overall. So an engineer in India probably makes as much as an engineer in certainly Eastern Europe. And sometimes engineers in Eastern Europe might make as much as an engineer in the Silicon Valley. It just depends on that person's background, but that's very nebulous. Whereas customer service representatives and things like that, it's going to be a little slower to catch out because there's more talent. But again, I think we'll see this change with time.
Yeah. Interesting. Alex, what happens at Virbela? What do you do?
Yeah, so we're predominantly still in the U.S., probably a little less than 10% of folks outside of the U.S. at this point. But we're going the kind of the same approach regardless of location. We're not creating variability by location at this point, and focus on a not the top Apple and Facebook type salaries, but moderate to good salaries kind of across the board, and focusing on company culture and being in a place that people want to be at.
Yeah, just on you mentioned Apple, and the announcement last week that Apple, unsurprisingly, I guess, for those of us who know how Apple operates, but they are going to be expecting people to come back in. Do you see that as a benefit for you if you're able to offer more flexible working? Will that be a benefit when you are trying to recruit?
I certainly believe so. There are going to be some, there's lots of variability out there, right? And just like there are a lot of people who like the flexibility, I think there's a smaller percentage of people who are missing the office and are excited to get back. So they might continue to get those folks, but in general, I think the flexibility is going to provide huge advantage to recruiting efforts for smaller companies like ourselves.
Yeah. Now, Darren, at Gitlab, I know you adjust salaries according to where people live because it's on your website and you're quite explicit about it. Why did you decide to do that, and how big a range is there? What is the difference between somebody working in Manhattan and somebody working in, I don't know, some other part of, well, it's almost anywhere else because it's cheaper almost anywhere else. But what is the magnitude? What is the scale of difference?
It's a market-based approach using data that co-located organizations have always had access to. So while this is being talked about as if it is a brand new concept, for years now, if you had an office in Singapore and then you relocated to an office in Phoenix, Arizona, for example, it's likely that a compensation conversation would be had. I think the big thing to consider here is, one, be transparent on whatever you're doing. And two, for organizations that are considering this, consider all of the additional ramifications of adjusting. So if you have already set a baseline and now you're going to adjust that, that will have ripple effects. It will impact talent acquisition, talent retention, talent branding, almost certainly your Glassdoor reviews and how companies are perceived. And I would say one other thing to leaders: if COVID has shown us anything, is that we have greatly overestimated the value of what we're spending on real estate to our business and greatly underestimated what we're spending on the people that drive our business. So make sure that that is at the forefront of your mind when you're making these long-term decisions.
Yeah, it's an interesting point, because now Gitlab has what, not a single office, just mailing addresses around the world?
That is correct. So we are 1,300 people in more than 65 countries with no company-owned offices, but we do have addresses.
You did have an office in San Francisco once, I think, right?
That's correct. So coming out of Y Combinator, it was the thing to do. That's a startup incubator. The team did have an office very briefly. People showed up for a few days and realized that work was still getting done. Why bother with the commute? And if you want to scale your company rapidly, as Nicole mentioned, being able to hire from anywhere is something that you consider. So it was there briefly. There are a few photos to prove it, but no more.
Yeah. So interesting. Janeen, what's the situation at Shopify? Do you discriminate on the basis of location, or do you, or not?
So we currently do have more of a regional-based pay philosophy. It's something certainly that we're learning a lot about right now and considering as we move forward. But I think one of the things worth mentioning is it's really to us about getting the best talent for the roles we need. So supply and demand for particular skill sets really comes into play for us as well. And you're going to have less of a delta when you're looking at engineering talent, et cetera. And a fun fact for us, I think when we claimed going into 2020 remote first, we had almost 100,000 applications through 2020. So, just for anyone who's wondering, does it open up the world of recruiting and hiring when you give the option of remote? I can assure you that it certainly does. We have a goal this year of hiring 2,021 engineers in 2021, and we're on target for that, and I credit this approach with a lot of our success there.
So, sorry, you got 100,000 applicants when you started advertising for people last year, because you also were growing incredibly quickly, of course, as one would expect in a year of e-commerce. But how would that compare to a previous year, or say 2-3 years ago? What would be the size of the applicant numbers you would get?
It's a good question. I'm going to say it's possibly double, what we would have seen. So I think, it just goes to show you that the appetite is there, and well, again, there's going to be a group of people who will also self-select out from Shopify. This is something that we talk about. This is something that we know and are expecting, particularly, again, when the world opens up more than it has today. I think for a period of time, people have been a little bit more hesitant to make big changes with all the other uncertainty. So we expect that's going to be part of our reality as well. But I think ultimately it comes down to, again, designing your life. What do you want your life to look like? What's the right situation for you? And then who's the employer that's going to give you the best opportunity to be successful?
Yeah. And have you made any big real estate decisions as a result of the changed policy?
Yeah, nothing that I can share at this point. We know that we will be continuing to have offices around the world. We're going to be using them very, very differently. So that's the work the team is in right now, is to determine exactly what will those look like and how will they be used. But part of our belief is that it makes great sense. And we actually learned this from our support org, who have been remote for several years. But it makes great sense to bring people together on occasion with intention, to innovate, to build relationships. And that's not going to go away for us. So we are in the process right now of designing what that looks like, how we'll use our spaces, and when and how we'll bring things together.
Right. Okay. Now we've got some interesting questions coming through. Just going back to the legal point, there's a question here from a person who'd like to know, are there realistic and applicable legal schemes that would allow working from home? Nicole?
Are there realistic? Could you say that?
Realistic and are there any sort of legal schemes that allow working from home? And just an allied question to that: are you seeing countries starting to change their tax and immigration frameworks to attract work from anywhere workers? In fact, we have actually seen a couple, I think, haven't we?
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, I think there's a huge opportunity there. People want, these digital workers to reside in their countries. And yes, there are schemes available. First of all, there's a global employer of record platform. So, this is a relatively new system or a new industry where other companies will hire your employees on your behalf. So you don't have to go through the process of figuring out the legal, tax, and HR implications of hiring globally. You just employ someone through another platform. But besides that, yes, we're seeing lots of countries. So I believe Bermuda is one of the ones who invited people to come live and work for up to a year. And we're seeing other countries do that as well. It's a great opportunity, I think, for countries to bring in highly talented people into their economies and grow with the opportunity that's here at hand for the world at large, and take advantage of a challenging situation and turn it into a net benefit.
Yeah. And Darren, have you come across any instances where you're seeing countries starting to make interesting changes, apart from the ones that we've read about?
Yeah, countries, but I think more interestingly, regionally, you take a look at something like Tulsa Remote. You have this small and mid-sized town that may not want to attract a skyscraper in their downtown, but instead they invest in things like great green spaces and great medical centers, and then they just invite people to bring their careers to them. This will massively redefine how municipal planning is done. Instead of trying to lobby for a corporate to build a skyscraper, for example, you'll invest in much more sustainable long-term solutions that have a net benefit of many more people. And then once people come there, even as their career evolves and even as they change jobs and change employers, now towns and community are competing for you to stay there long term. So even as your career evolves, you don't necessarily have to move. That's a much better, more sustainable way to build community long term. And I think this will be a game changer for small and mid-sized communities, especially as rural broadband initiatives proliferate.
Right. Well, broadband is such an issue. Now, Alex, you must come across this constantly. I mean, does your platform freeze a lot in certain locations? I'm guessing if it was over here in Britain being used, the answer would be yes, it would be freezing quite a bit, particularly once you get out of London and the big cities.
We certainly have people from all over the world. Stanford Business School runs executive education programs through the platform. I think they have cohorts of about 300, and those 300 are logging in from about 100 different countries at a time, and giving them that sense of feeling present at a Stanford-like campus, despite being virtual. So that hasn't been a major issue. Of course, you need a good connection like any digital platform, but we're seeing those get stronger and stronger throughout. Our sister company is also, it's the fastest growing real estate company, I think, in the world, at least the States, called eXp Realty. They kind of figured this out a long time ago. Starting in 2009, they had no offices, but they started using Virbela in 2016. There were 900 agents. They've grown to over 55,000 agents in about 4.5 years without having any brick and mortar. They just, in the past year, moved into 12 new countries without stepping foot into those countries and bringing actually their virtual headquarters to those countries. So it's interesting to see how quickly a company that's fully remote can scale. And back to Darren's point of reinvesting the money back into your people, they take the cost savings that they get from not having brick and mortar offices and give a better commercial deal back to the agents who are actually, their sales folks who are growing the company. So
Yeah,
I think
yeah.
a good example, if you give it back to the people, those with brick and mortar just simply can't compete because of the economics of it.
That's interesting. There's a question here that's that actually I think you might be better suited to answer, Alex. And it's a question about the idea of virtual touch points. So many work from home practices are including virtual touch points and team gatherings as part of the new model of working. How do you actually make them work across time zones? And obviously you're going to tell us that Virbela is the way to go when it comes to when it comes to introducing these touch points. But I mean, for those who can't afford or are in areas where broadband scarcity makes it difficult to use a system like yours, what's the sort of bare minimum that you should be looking for these sort of virtual touch points?
Yeah. I think what we have to be careful of is making kind of global positions even across your organization. So we have kind of different approaches depending on the team. We have 24/7, technical support, right? So we want those technical support folks to be located in geographical areas that it's realistic kind of time zones for them to be working in. Whereas our engineers can have more flexibility in terms of when they're working in which times. We do try to be mindful of time zones when we're scheduling meetings. To be honest, it's probably an area we can improve on. But your office is also in Virbela open 24/7. 24/7. It's always on. It's always there. So I can also manage by walking around. I can bring my avatar and just kind of walk about the office, see who happens to be in. We don't force anyone to be in, certain time periods unless their job again is really specific to it, like concierge or supporting our customers. So they need to be in the environment. But for others, there's much more variability. We do our all hands once a week for a half an hour in the environment and make sure we give people 5-10 minutes just to have casual conversation around breakout tables. We can turn private volumes on or off, so we can have those little sideline discussions before we pull it into a full company meeting.
And if I'm in one of your virtual offices, can I go into an office and shut the door and will people still know I'm there, or you can?
Absolutely, yes. Yeah. So everything from one-on-one conversations behind a closed door to big auditoriums with over 1,000 people in the environment, or thousands of people walking around a virtual expo hall, all possible in the platform.
Interesting. So, Janeen, I think you have big town halls at Shopify, right? What's the technology that you use?
So we have a broadcast technology that we use that allows us to have a pretty seamless experience with posts and to embed videos and things like that. And one of the learnings that we've had is our support team had a way of doing their town halls because they were fully remote that we hadn't yet adopted in the rest of the organization prior to the pandemic. So we used to host live town halls in where we had large offices, and then some folks would need to see recordings after, but it wasn't all kind of one experience, and it, you didn't feel it the same way all around the world. And so that's one thing that we've really learned is, and the word democratizing experiences has been used a few times through this conversation, but I would say that's something we really saw with town halls is we now have this one standard moment in the week. It's an hour long. It's broadcast once. It's shown in other parts of the world when it's the appropriate time to show it and air it there, so they can have some live conversation throughout. But I would say that's one of the practices that it made us better actually going this way. And the quality of the experience is better. The rhythm and the way that the conversation stitched together is stronger. And it's something that truly people look forward to on a weekly basis as a way to stay connected. So,
So who actually speaks? Who speaks at the town hall?
Oh, that's a great question. It depends. Usually it's hosted by our leadership team. Often it's Toby Shannon, our COO, or Toby Lukey, our CEO, hosting. But we bring in the most relevant people from around the business to speak to whatever the topic might be, which is one of the great things about doing it this way is, it's not level specific. It's not title specific. It's really about who are the people that are best positioned to be speaking to the organization and teaching us what we need to know about the topic at hand. So it gives lots more development opportunity around the business, which is something that I think people enjoy.
Yeah. And Darren, what about at Gitlab? Do you have big remote town halls every week or not?
We don't currently, but we do use Gitlab, the platform. So Gitlab, the company, makes Gitlab the platform to collaborate company-wide. And we've talked a bit about tools, and I think it's half tooling and half culture to really nail asynchronous. I would argue that asynchronous is the superpower of any great remote team, so it is certainly something that you should aspire to. But I want to talk a bit about the culture side of that. What we haven't talked a lot about is how do you build culture in a remote setting, and then how does that impact every other piece of the business? And you have to convert anything that's tacit in a company, so this implied knowledge that you might get while walking around an office, to explicit. And so at Gitlab, we actually have a bias towards asynchronous communication, but we're careful to file that under our diversity and inclusion value instead of something like efficiency or results. And the reason is very simple. If you make the effort to move a piece of work forward without demanding 30 or 45 minutes of someone else's time, which they could use to engage with family or community or something more meaningful, you are fundamentally being more respectful for that person's time. And so when you frame async as a matter of respect instead of an argument about efficiency and results, it is much easier to get organizational buy-in.
Right. No, that's interesting. And before that, you were saying that that's one of the things that companies really need to think very carefully about. What are some of? I mean, without naming any names, can you give us an example of what goes wrong if companies don't think very intentionally and carefully about this?
The worst outcome is that you create chaos and dysfunction because a subset of your company is still working office first. So literally writing on a whiteboard that no one virtually can see. And then a subset is working remote first. So only collaborating on a digital whiteboard that they don't share the link with anyone else in the company. And so you want to do everything that you can to break down these communication silos. And honestly, that's why I recommend organizations consider hiring a head of remote or someone devoted making this transition. Gitlab was one of the first to hire a head of remote, but now you've seen companies like Dropbox and Facebook and many, many others invest in this. And it's very simple. If you want something to go well at your company, you invest in it. And what we're talking about is big. This cannot be a single line item on a chief people officer or a CEO. There's way too much to wrap your head around. And this is a multi-year iterative journey. It's going to take a lot of time and investment to get right.
Yeah, because you were appointed head of remote in 2019, I think, right before the pandemic. Yeah, and because of your remote first experience. And Nicole, are other companies, apart from the ones that Darren just mentioned, starting to look at actually creating a head of remote role more, or is it still a bit of a rarity?
Yeah, I think everybody's trying to figure this out right now, and certainly allocating a tremendous amount of resources towards building company culture, digitizing their learning and development, figuring out how to hire people everywhere and make sure they have the best people for the job, but importantly, also making sure they're integrated into the business. So yes, we see companies investing in this in many ways, and I agree that it's highly necessary.
Yeah, interesting. There's actually a question that's come through that is probably one I think you might be best placed to answer, or at least well placed to answer. Does hiring work from anywhere employees via third-party employers or Peos really remove corporate tax risk for employers in most cases, or are there still hurdles to overcome?
Yes. I mean, I think what we've seen is in most cases when companies are hiring a few people in a jurisdiction, the tax payable to a government would be net equal if that individual is being hired through a local company. So the governments have generally supported the industry and the business model, assuming they're set up well and structured for success. You can't just use anyone as your global employer of record. But it's definitely a nuanced position. And I think every company has to look at their own corporate tax profile. So for example, if you have a manufacturing hub in India, you can't employ everybody through a PEO and think that's going to eliminate your tax risk. If you have a couple employees in India and you hire them through an employer of record, then yes, I think the net tax payable to the government is probably the same anyway, and the government is supportive of it because the employees are being paid well and properly via a good local employer.
Right. Interesting. Yeah. And Alex, I wonder if I can ask you, there's another question here that be interesting to hear your response to. Are some industries and job types better suited for working from anywhere, or will the option eventually come to pretty much everybody or not? I mean, who are your main clients, really, I guess is another way of framing that question.
So certainly we see a lot of knowledge workers in our platform. Folks who are often at their desk, whether they're in the office or at home, regardless. So that's certainly an area that we see more virtual work. Also areas of education. We're seeing a lot more interest in being remote and realizing the cost of being in person. The events industry has been an interesting one because you think of events in person and the value you get in person events, but event companies are seeing that they can tap into a much bigger, much broader audience by doing some of each, right? Some events in person as well as continuing to do remote events. So I think we'll see a lot of that as well.
Yeah. But did you say you were working with universities as well?
Yes.
So presumably, I mean, that comes under the broad umbrella of knowledge workers, which is just a massive one. But can you imagine a time when all sorts of companies are just starting to really be just going for working from anywhere in a way that you never saw before? I mean, I think we have seen up till now, Darren can correct me, but it's been a predominantly tech industry move, or at least they've been the first movers. I know they're not exclusively, it's not exclusively confined to tech. But that's been very much the way it's been progressing so far, right?
The other areas, consulting firms. So we've seen, I think, 3 of the 4, the big 4 in that space coming on in starting to test different activities in virtual worlds like Virbela and different experiments of how to work remote. I actually think we've gone from a year where everyone was kind of forced to be fully remote. I have a feeling that hybrid is actually going to be even more challenging than fully remote for many companies. Especially if people can work from anywhere, right? It's not easy for them to just come into the office, 2-3 days a week. So I think there's going to be a lot of learnings to be had, a lot of experimentation that's going to need to happen in a hybrid model. And there's lots to learn. We're working with, what can I share? You think of, employers bring everyone to one office. Now I think what we're starting to see is, I think as Darren was mentioned, people can go to co-working spots for their work. But now you have all of these spokes, and what's the hub that brings all of those folks together? So working with one of those big co-working providers on thinking about how do we offer all of their customers both, where they can have folks at all these satellite offices, but also an opportunity at headquarters to come together while remote. So thinking a lot about this hub and spoke model at the moment.
Yeah. Well, you're not alone there. Obviously, a lot of companies are starting to do that. That whole question of hybrid working is obviously just incredibly live at the moment, and it's a whole other one that we could spend at least another hour talking about. But unfortunately, I can see the clock ticking down, and we have a mere 27 seconds left. But can I just say thank you, all of you, very much for sharing those insights. It's so interesting to hear what's been happening in your organizations and what you can tell us from outside them as well about how this is all progressing. I suspect it would be great if we could come back in 3 months and see what's happening again there, because I'm sure it's going to be looking quite different then. But thank you all very much, and I'll close down now and hand you back to our moderator. Thank you.